which was a lot of money. I mean, not as much as that 100,000 that guy turned down, but the kicker was that how do you get support? The Wright brothers weren't rich; they were self-funded, but they did finally get some support. And the time was part of the thing that Europe was heading toward war. And Europe, the cities are a lot closer together, and there was a much higher population density. So they could see more point to airplanes. Didn't have to go very far, in other words.
Well, didn't they load up their airplane after they figured out how to make a coordinated turn, and they went to Paris and flew it as a demo? Was it, 1907 or 1908?
The first flight was in 03, so yeah. They put on some demonstrations, but at the beginning of World War I, incidentally, most of the planes that were being flown weren't Wright Brothers airplanes.
Really?
Like Curtiss built airplanes. Yeah, and the Russians and the other countries over there had far more airplanes together. Most American pilots were flying foreign airplanes.
My goodness. Well, isn't it amazing how you can't go to the government and get a grant to build an aircraft because it's a neat idea, but you can sure get an unlimited budget if there's a war coming on.
That seems to have pushed the development of lots of things. Space, too, after all. The reason for the big rockets, the first satellites were all launched by what were really intercontinental ballistic missiles, easily converted to putting something up in space. The Russians and the Americans, or the Germans working for both of them, which was, the Werner von Braun and his gang.
Oh, sure.
The United States, but our Germans are better than your Germans, somebody said at one point.
I'm interested in the sociology of this too. It rarely gets studied, and I want to get Kathleen's input on this, because the drive that Wilbur and Orville felt, and the challenges that they have, most of which was to make their engine, because they spent a long time learning how to cast iron in order to make their engine. But it was that drive, that incredible feeling of waking up in the middle of the night wondering what it's like to fly above the ground, that drove them to build this aircraft and actually have the nerve to get in it themselves and fly it.
There's a lot of excitement involved in that kind of thing, where you almost become obsessed with developing the product that you're attempting to develop, and in being the first to do that. There's a lot of excitement about it.
Well, there is. I mean, you look at Edison and Westinghouse and Tesla, how they used to put their sprinting shoes on to run down to the patent office to get that idea patented first. It was unbelievable fever.
Well, when Tesla and Edison both had over 1,000 patents, which is quite remarkable when you think about it. Of course, they lived quite a long while, but still. No, the drive to be first, to get something new, and the persistence. I mean, Edison tried how many different things before he found a suitable filament for a light bulb? And his view was, well, I know that one doesn't work. He blew a generator one time. Well, I know I can run it well over rated value. I just better stop soon enough. But these guys were, yes, driven is a good word, and they were clever, and these guys weren't loners. The Wright brothers were much more loners than Edison or Tesla. I mean, the Wright brothers pretty much were loners, the two of them together, but Tesla and Edison had staffs of people working with them, and it's a good thing when you think about it that they did. Patents, new ideas. My mantra, and it's in several of my chapters, I guess, in the book, I can't resist repeating it, is that technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future is not an extrapolation of the past. You have to change how you do things. The laser isn't just a better light bulb. The physics are altogether different. here at least you could see a clean-cut product with these guys. Kathy wrote medical chapters, and we each wrote 7 chapters out of 14. But what she saw was people who were being prevented from reducing the misery of the world, which sounds very strange, doesn't it? You'd think everybody'd be all for them. Oh, that's going to cure a disease or make people safer, protect children.
Well, it seems that you have this pyramid of, and I love this word that you guys coined in the book, impossibilists. You have these impossibilists that have risen to, I'm going to call it their level of I don't know, ignorance, their obsolescence, and yet they try to maintain it.
Incompetence.
Yeah, well, they're competent at what they do, but they have stopped at that point. And really, I hate to throw this in here, but we're facing that in the automobile industry right now. We have a government that irrefutably supports the big car makers who have no intention of producing an affordable electric vehicle. And you've got a dozen small companies out there that could do it in 6 months and put a really good vehicle out there, but the government won't give them any money because they want to support, well, we call it the status quo, but they want to support the impossibilists who say a plug-in electric vehicle that's practical for use every day just isn't possible. But we'll be happy to spend your grant money doing it.
Yes. Well, as I say, in these areas you can see technology and profit and all that sort of thing. But it's more disturbing. Kathy want to tell us about one of my favorite people, Ignaz Semmelweis, who was a very important man and perfectly illustrates the resistance of the powers that be to new ideas, new approaches, no matter how beneficial they are. Wouldn't you say that was true, Kathy?
Yes, I would. Ignaz Semmelweis lived in the mid-19th century and taught medical students at the Vienna General Hospital. He had grown up in Pest in a family, a merchant family, and after high school he had gone to medical school in Vienna. And when he graduated, he applied to work in the obstetrical unit. And after a time of waiting and learning some more, he was finally accepted to a position where he was supervising medical students. And every morning, he would take them into the morgue where they would perform autopsies and dissections on the women and infants who had died the day before, mostly from childbed fever. And childbed fever was very perplexing in that time frame. Most doctors thought that it was something that was contagious. Maybe it was caused by what they called miasmas, which were putrid odors that were emitted by swamps and maybe outhouses and that sort of thing. Or there was even a theory, it was called the milk metastasis theory, where they thought that the milk from a nursing mother had reversed direction and had moved down into her uterus and had caused her death. And some even attributed it to emotional distress due to their fear of giving birth to these infants. One of the unfortunate things was that the women who were in the Vienna General Hospital, which, by the way, was the largest in Europe, were women who were low income. They might have been homeless. Perhaps they were new immigrants. But most women had the means to afford a doctor to go to their homes or a midwife. And the mortality rate was low there. Also, the mortality rate was low in the midwife's unit at the Vienna General Hospital. It was generally about 2%. But in the obstetrical unit where the doctors were practicing and learning, the rate was averaging about 20%.
That's
and
a big
during
difference.
epidemic periods, what they called them, it would increase. And sometimes entire rows of mothers would die within hours or days of each other, and also the infants would. Well, it was quite by accident that Ignaz Semmelweis discovered the probable cause of this. One of his colleagues was in the mortuary, in the morgue, and he pricked his finger on a scalpel. And he ended up developing all of the symptoms of childbed fever and died within days.
Wow.
And childbed fever is actually an infection of the uterus and the genital tract, and it becomes systemic, a systemic infection within hours. So Semmelweis introduced a very simple hand-washing solution and ordered all of his students to, instead of just wiping their bloody hands on their aprons before they performed multiple internal examinations on these women, they would simply wash their hands. And the mortality rate immediately dropped significantly. It actually went down finally to the 2% in the midwife unit, where they used wooden models rather than performing dissections. And Semmelweis conducted good scientific work on this. He recorded the results. He very carefully documented all of his statistics. He even did laboratory experiments to support his theory.
And, of course, his work was widely accepted, and he was awarded.
He was asked, he was forced from his position. Did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, of course, he was widely recognized as a hero and given all the awards of a Nobel Prize winner, no doubt.
Lots of doubt.
Well, after his death, he was given much recognition. But during his entire lifetime, he was called a charlatan. He published his findings, he lectured, he attempted to support his findings, but the zeitgeist of the old guard would hear none of it.
Wow.
I mean, you can just imagine them standing there with their hands over their ears yelling, no, no, no. And they refused to even, in many cases, attempt his hand-washing technique. And as a result, thousands of women and infants died needlessly. But after his death, many, many years after his death, he was recognized, and a medical school was named after him. Unfortunately,
they even issued I was just going to say, they even issued a postage stamp. What a higher honor can you get?
Yeah, exactly. Well, this kind of stuff is flabbergasting to us now. But when you're in that situation, it just, you have to listen to the status quo. We're doing it right now in our engineering and our scientific communities right now. We have the same thing. It's not necessarily the powers that be, so to speak. It's more, maybe the pride of the managers that are in charge of the situation right now. It's like they will not listen to the simplest, most logical, straightforward solution. For instance, one of the write-ups in the book that I really enjoyed was about the Fleischmann-Pons cold fusion experiment. I was an undergraduate at the time that this came out, and half the science department said, wow, it's a breakthrough. We're going to move away from fission. We're going to have fusion reactors and make clean energy. And the other half said, that's impossible. There's no such thing as cold fusion. Those guys are charlatans. And I thought they were joking, but that's exactly